here and talk about the mission that we have to pursue to stand up equal education opportunity for all. But if we take a minute just to look back at what we have achieved, Brown versus Board of Education represents a seminal moment in American history where we rejected that ugly history that was in conflict and in sharp contradiction to the principles that this country stood for. I think it's also important, Mr. Horsford, to point out that Brown versus Board of Education was not some gift that fell out of the sky. This case was won and fought by some seriously committed soldiers for justice. And I know we will talk about Thurgood Marshall tonight here quite a bit. But before Thurgood Marshall, there was a man named Charles Hamilton Houston. And Charles Hamilton Houston was a brilliant man. He was a Harvard-trained lawyer. He was assistant dean of Howard Law School. And at an early point in his career, he was offended and outraged by Jim Crow segregation, particularly in schools. And he got an old video camera, and he went down south, and he drove in his car, and he couldn't stay in a hotel because black people were not allowed to stay in white hotels during those days. So you had to sleep in your car. Maybe somebody will take you in for the night. But he took that video camera and demonstrated and showed and took film and footage of exactly what African-American students were living through. The harsh conditions, the fact that there were all grades of students in the same classroom, the fact that the buildings were inferior, the books were outdated, the facilities were in every way inferior, and that this promise of separate but equal was anything but equal and was inherently unequal. Charles Hamilton Houston trained up a cadre of lawyers who would take on and fight American segregation. Among those, Thurgood Marshall, but there were others as well, Spotswood Robinson. There were many other great lawyers who back in the day, before it was even difficult for an African-American lawyer to stand up and do anything, these lawyers stood up and made the case that in America, the ideals upon which this country was founded demanded that segregation be struck down. And so these lawyers, first of all, they didn't go straight to the schools, to the elementary schools. First, they went to the graduate schools, and they desegregated the graduate schools, and they fought against white primaries. These are primaries where blacks in some states could vote in the general election, but they couldn't participate in the primary, so they had no choice in picking who was the Democrat or who was the Republican. They took on restrictive covenant cases. They took on all types of cases and attacked these standing monuments to segregation and beat them down. And then they got to the famous Brown versus Board of Education. But Charles Hamilton Houston, a man who died at the age of 54, was not able to see the great work that his student Thurgood Marshall had done as they led the team to beat down segregation in public schools. But his spirit was there. And so today, as we commemorate this towering victory of defeating Jim Crow segregation in schools, we have to also commemorate the heroic figures of Charles Hamilton Houston, Thurgood Marshall, Spotswood Robinson, and many, many more who fought these battles, these black lawyers who fought these battles and would not accept the status quo. So I want to commend you, Mr. Horsford, for leading this today, and I certainly hope that Americans all across this country, black, white, Native American, Hispanic, Asian, all colors, all backgrounds, will take a moment and thank those lawyers who fought to defeat segregation in America, because what they literally did, and they did this for every single American of every color, they allowed Americans to stand up and say, we do in fact live in the land of the free and the home of the brave. Whereas if we did not defeat segregation, we'd have to say we landed the white free and the white brave and the enslaved and segregated everybody else. And that is nothing to crow about. In fact, that stands as a shame on our nation's history. But the achievement of these brave lawyers restored our nation's honor. And I think that this is why I think Brown versus Board of Education is the most important case in American history. And I thank you for taking a moment to focus our attention on it, and I yield back.
I thank the gentleman for reminding us of the great legal minds who contributed and helped build the case which resulted in the Brown decision. The fact that it took a team a strategic team of formidable legal minds to come up with the right strategy that ultimately resulted in this great decision. I thank the gentleman, Representative Ellison, for reminding us of their distinct contribution. I'd like to now turn to the gentlelady from California, Representative Barbara Lee, who comes to this caucus and this body with tremendous experience, working first in the community as a caseworker on behalf of people, and always keeping the focus of people in the front of the policies that we are pursuing to advance in this great institution. I now yield time to the gentlelady from California, Representative Barbara Lee.
Thank you very much, and let me thank you, Congressman Horsford, for that very gracious introduction, and also for your continued leadership on so many fronts, especially in organizing the Congressional Black Caucus's special order, along with Congressman Hakeem Jeffries. I really want to thank you for making sure that the theme this evening of this special order, the 60th anniversary of the Brown versus Board of Education, did not go unremarked. Thank you so much. You're both doing really a fantastic job representing and working hard on behalf of your constituents. And I also just have to say to our fearless chair, Congresswoman Marcia Fudge, our Congressional Black Caucus chair, she really serves as an excellent steward of the conscience of the Congress. Now, let me just say, I was just a child, Congressman Horsford, in El Paso, Texas, when the Supreme Court issued its landmark decision on Brown versus Board of Education on May 17, 1954. Schools were segregated when I started school. And so that was not in the not-so-distant past. I remember it very well. My good friend, Congressman Beto O'Rourke, so ably represents El Paso today. And I have to tell you, the results and impact of the Supreme Court's decision striking down the separate but equal doctrine is visible throughout the city. And I'm proud to say also that in 1955, El Paso became the first city in the state of Texas to integrate its public schools. My mother, Mildred Parrish Massey, was one of the 7 African-American students to boldly integrate the University of Texas at El Paso. In 1957, El Paso elected Raymond Tejas, the first Mexican-American mayor of a major United States city. And on June 7, 1962, the El Paso City Council, under the leadership of Alderman Burt Williams, passed the first city ordinance of any major city in the former Confederacy outlawing segregation in hotels, motels, restaurants, and theaters. These were public places that were previously barred to African Americans, and in some cases in El Paso earlier to Mexican Americans. This history has been recounted by Congressman O'Rourke during Black History Month, and I thank him for that, because I just have to say, I lived this. My family lived this. My friends lived this. Just as so many millions of people throughout our country lived this shameful time in our history. This is just a bit of my personal background, but we know that despite the landmark decision, it would take decades in many cities and states for that first mandate of the Supreme Court to be carried out. But because of Brown, we have the Civil Rights Act of 1964, the Voting Rights Act of 1965, and the Civil Rights Act of 1986. Of course, we've come a long way since the 1950s and 60s, but the fact remains that the fight to end inequality in public education continues. The end of the legal doctrine argued then by the brilliant, great Thurgood Marshall, who was the attorney and later Supreme Court Justice, and the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, that did not mean necessarily the end of racial segregation by neighborhood and community, resulting in schools that continue to see stark segregation by race and income. In fact, many schools have reversed the desegregation gains of the 1970s and the 1980s, while many other schools remain as segregated as they ever were. As a new UCLA report mentioned last week, I just have to cite this, Congressman Horsford. UCLA, Brown at 60, is called Great Progress, a Long Retreat on an Uncertain Future. Black and Latino students tend to be in schools with a substantial majority of poor children, while white and Asian students typically attend middle